So, hello everyone, good morning or good afternoon as the case may be. And thank you for joining us today for the second quarterly offering. My goodness, how much time passes. It feels like more time has passed than that. For the second quarterly offering of the IOI's alumni program, our continuous development program, which of course we also welcome you all here for. All of us all of our early career Ocean professional audience, IOI alumni, welcome and thank you for making the time to be here. This time we have a very interesting panel, which my colleague Cosmin will describe. But I would like also to, applaud the organizer and the expert speakers that have been collected here for you today, whom Cosmin will introduce later, for drawing attention to a very interesting problematic in the ocean governance. In fact, I thought it was very appropriate that in the introduction or in the concept to this event, we jokingly called it the other CO2 problem. It's a problem which I think deserves more attention. So I won't keep our excellent panel further. I just want to please make one suggestion. There will be Q&A to be addressed to the speakers at the end of all the presentations. Please do place your questions in the Q&A box, which you will find in this meeting. And I know many of you are now familiar with each other and you catch up with each other. Please do that in the chat. We will do our very best to collect all your questions and give them to the moderator to address to the speaker you identify. So thank you, and Cosmin, it's in your good hands. I wish you all an enjoyable webinar.
Thank you very much, Antonella, for the introduction. As well, I'm wishing everyone a good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and welcome to our second CPD of 2026. I've looked a bit for the participants list. It's wonderful to see many names we remember from before, from across the IOI network and other networks as well. So heartfelt thank you for joining us. As Antonella mentioned, today's webinar will focus on ocean acidification, which we believe it's a governance challenge hiding in plain sight. While often overshadowed by other climate-related challenges, ocean acidification has profound implications for marine ecosystems, coastal communities, and most importantly for us today, sustainable ocean governance. So, over the next 90 minutes, our distinguished speakers will explore how science, policy, and international cooperation can come together to move this issue from awareness to meaningful action. Without further ado, to begin, it is my pleasure to introduce the first speaker for today, Dr. Steve Widdicombe, who is the director of the Sharjah Marine Science Research Center at the University of Corfacan and co-director of the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network. With more than 3 decades of experience in marine ecology, climate change, and ocean acidification research, Steve has been at the forefront of connecting cutting-edge science with international policy processes. Today, he will help us set the scene by exploring the science behind acidification, why it matters, and why this is increasingly becoming an issue that ocean governance can no longer overlook. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to everyone today. I'll just share my screen. Don't think that can be seen, can it yet?
Yeah.
Are you seeing the slides? Yes.
Yes, all good. I'm seeing the title slide.
Okay, so I'll start. Okay, so first of all, what is ocean acidification? Well, I can get onto the right screen here. Multiple screens. Okay, so the progression of ocean acidification. So ocean acidification first became a sort of scientific area of concern in the early 2000s, where it was discovered that the carbon dioxide that we produce as a species through burning fossil fuels, through changing land usage for big industrial processes like cement mixing, it's going into the atmosphere, but it wasn't staying in the atmosphere. Across the planet, at the surface of the ocean, between the atmosphere and the ocean, carbon dioxide was actually coming out of the atmosphere and going into the surface ocean. And when it did that, it was reacting with seawater, and to create a very simple reaction whereby it created a weak acid called carbonic acid, and that acid easily disassociated to create hydrogen ions and other elements of the carbonate cycle. So why is that important? And why should we worry about that? Because levels of carbon dioxide have fluctuated over millennia. But why is this such an issue? Well, the issue here is not necessarily just about how much carbon dioxide has gone into the atmosphere, but how quickly it's gone in. Effectively, we have taken a huge geological reservoir of carbon and bypassed the normal systems by which it would come out into the atmosphere and fast-tracked it into the biosphere. So it's overwhelmed the natural processes by which the ocean would normally buffer these changes in CO2. So effectively, we have swamped the system and driven the ocean, which is effectively an alkaline solution, its pH is greater than 7, towards acidity. So that's where the phrase ocean acidification comes from. And we now sit at a situation where at least 25% of all the carbon dioxide that we're producing ends up in the ocean, driving this marine phenomenon called ocean acidification. And in fact, now the ocean is around 40% more acidic, or closer to being acidic than it was in the pre-industrial. So it's a significant move, even though we're talking about pH units, the way in which we measure acidity of only 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 of a change, that actually represents a huge change in the chemistry of the ocean. But why do we worry about how the ocean chemistry changes? Well, inherently, ocean chemistry is one of the key drivers that influences marine life in the ocean. The ocean creatures are bathed in seawater, and anything that changes in the seawater will have an effect. And particularly when something like carbon dioxide, which is inherently a natural product, starts to change rapidly and quickly and over a large scale. Because carbon dioxide is a natural element, unlike some of the other pollutants that we deal with, it is actually hardwired into the physiology of many marine creatures, because carbon dioxide has always been part of the scene. So it becomes part of the animal's physiology. So it gives it a direct route into changing organisms' physiology. And when you change an organism's physiology, you change its behavior, change its likelihood to be successful, you can then cascade into ecosystem effects. Coupled to that, many of the marine creatures that we are most concerned about create calcium carbonate structures, effectively build structures out of chalk that either support them or protect them. Now that we know if you put chalk in an acid solution, it dissolves. And that is exactly what's happening with many of the calcium carbonate structures that many marine creatures rely on. The corals being an obvious example, but we can also think about seashells, mollusks. We can think about crustaceans such as crabs and lobsters. All of these things which depend on building calcium carbonate structures are going to find life very difficult. This has been widely recognized to such an extent that ocean acidification was considered to be one of the key planetary boundaries. And for those of you who haven't heard about the planetary boundaries, these are effectively a set of limits by which we feel that we need to keep the world within so that we can effectively maintain a sustainable and healthy planet. Now, ocean acidification on this diagram here, which maps out where we are with all of the planetary boundaries, you would think that perhaps ocean acidification is not a big issue because it's still effectively in the green. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And in a paper published very recently, in fact, last year, it's illustrated that we have underestimated the extent to which ocean acidification has breached this planetary boundary. And there are a number of aspects of that planetary boundary which have now passed from the theoretical safe zone into a zone of concern. And we're actually seeing biological impacts associated with that breach of that boundary. But ocean acidification is not just something that's happening way out there in the open ocean. It's actually happening, and it's happening more rapidly and more extremely in coastal systems. Why is that? Well, there are a number of coastal processes that directly exacerbate the process of acidification. And many of those processes are actually linked to activities that we perhaps have some degree of control over. So, for example, the flow of nitrogen or wastewater into coastal zones has been seen to speed up acidification. The way in which we disturb coastal systems, either by the resuspension of seabed sediments or through the destruction of what we call blue carbon habitats, such as seagrasses and mangroves and salt marshes, can exacerbate this ocean acidification signal. And these data came from the OSPAR quality status report that was published a few years ago, where we looked at a few of the long-term time series for ocean acidification and saw this very phenomenon of coastal sites showing enhanced ocean acidification over open ocean ones. What we also noticed was that there was a complete lack of monitoring in key areas. Certainly not enough monitoring that was able to differentiate the huge variability that you see in coastal systems. Ocean acidification has also been recognized by the Convention for Biological Diversity in the recently adopted Global Biodiversity Framework, and has its own target, Target 8. Now, Target 8 mandates countries to minimize the impacts of climate change, both in terms of warming, but also specifically mentions ocean acidification in that target. I was involved in the ad hoc working group that developed the indicators for target, well, all the targets, but specifically I was contributing to Target 8. And what became apparent was that there was no specific quantitative target that allowed you to measure the impact of ocean acidification on biodiversity. So what you will find when you look at the target indicators for Target 8 is that they are effectively indicators that policy has been developed to address ocean acidification. Now, whilst this is not ideal, and ideally we would want to have targets that demonstrated either the impacts on ocean acidification or the success in mitigating those, this in essence does represent a very good first step to at least identify areas where we are trying to take action. We also know that in terms of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, within SDG 14, there is one specific Sustainable Development Goal and indicator on marine acidity. And what we see from this graphic is that whilst many countries are now starting to report ocean pH in response to the SDG 14.3 goal, there are still large parts of the world where no data are either being collected or in some cases maybe are being collected but not being reported. So there's a lot of work to be done to enable countries to be able to understand how ocean acidification is advancing in their own waters. So how do we access scientific information on ocean acidification? Well, about 20 years ago, a group of scientists came together and formed the global network of ocean acidification called the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network. And their three main areas of interest were about improving our understanding of how ocean acidification as a chemical change was progressing, understanding how that impacts on biological systems, and also then acquiring the data and knowledge to be able to optimize forecasts of how it might change in the future. There's approximately 1,000 scientists as part of this network around over 100 countries. So they are quite literally, ocean acidification scientists are quite literally everywhere. And that's just a few figures here to sort of give you an idea of the reach of this network. But what I would like to draw your attention to is no matter where you are in terms of the world, if you are looking to develop policies that take into account ocean acidification, there will be scientists and will be organized coordinating networks of scientists in your particular region, because the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network organizes itself into regional hubs that deal with the contextual issues associated with ocean acidification in that region. So if you're looking for support in terms of bringing ocean acidification science into policy, I would urge you to contact GOAN, their network, and seek out those people in your region who will be able to help you bring the ocean acidification science into policy. So that's all I have to say today. So I will now hand over to the next speaker. And I believe have I stopped sharing? I couldn't tell on the screen.
I think you did.
Brilliant. Okay,
Yes,
so
all good. Thank you very much, Steve. That was a really comprehensive introduction. I think you've reminded us that ocean acidification is far more than a scientific phenomenon. It's a governance issue. As you've shown, there are networks which are already doing a lot of good work. And I'm guessing, if I can draw one conclusion, all it's missing is more sustained monitoring, more decision-making based on the scientific research, and I think we need even more international cooperation. But I'm seeing from your presentation that there's already a great start. And I think that our next speaker will further add to what you said. And thus, it's my pleasure of introducing Dr. Annika Frosch, who is advisor and OA Action Plan lead at the Ocean Acidification Alliance, and also a research fellow at the UCL Energy Institute of Shipping and Oceans Research Group. Annika's work sits at the intersection of science, law, and policy, supporting governments in developing ocean acidification action plans, while also following international negotiations on shipping decarbonization. Today, she will explore why ocean acidification deserves far greater attention within governance frameworks, and she will get the discussion rolling on how policy can begin to bridge the gap between science and action. Annika, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Cosmin. I'm going to try to share my screen. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, let's talk about ocean acidification governance. So before we go really into detail on OA governance and kind of the problems we have with that, I just wanted to underline that even if you come from a governance background like me or a policy background, that it's really important to understand the science and really base your assessments on the science. That's why we had Stephen just explain a little bit about the science before me, because without really understanding the science, we don't actually understand what problem we're trying to regulate. And without that, we can't really identify who should be in charge of regulating the problem and which, for example, legal and policy fields are actually relevant to this problem. In addition, for example, for ocean acidification, a lot of times we kind of mix up climate change, coral bleaching, ocean acidification. So to really understand what are the differences between this problem and how can the solution actually cater to it, we really need to understand the basics. And for ocean acidification, in terms of area, we really need to look at land, as Stephen mentioned, and also ocean and atmosphere. So where do we even begin to understand which actor and legal or policy field is relevant? But when we understand the basics, we can really not just understand where to look, we can also understand how to really find the actor and instrument most suitable to deal with ocean acidification and which action should actually be taken to deal with the problem. So really for ocean acidification, this can be mitigation, it can also be adaptation, but only when we learn about the science, we can make that decision. So the biggest question is, what do we actually know about ocean acidification? As I said, like once we've seen Stephen's presentation, now that we have this knowledge, where do we move? I just wanted to give you an overview of all the triggers that we have to consider while making a solution for governance, and without really going and repeating everything that Stephen said. We have learned that ocean acidification is caused by CO2 from the atmosphere. That's the main cause. But CO2, as Stephen mentioned, can also come from land-based pollution, urbanization, agriculture. All of that can lead to ocean acidification hotspots by the coastline, which are more regional and local. We also have to keep an eye on geoengineering technologies, in particular marine carbon dioxide removal, because those technologies are kind of trying to fiddle with the atmosphere and the ocean balance, and they're trying to draw atmospheric CO2 into the ocean. While some of these technologies are great and they could possibly help us to reduce CO2 in the atmosphere, we have to really watch how they impact the ocean and if they can lead to ocean acidification, and just make sure that they're not doing more harm than good. Then, actually, Stephen hasn't mentioned this yet, but ocean acidification can also be triggered by NOx and SOx. So those are also gases that are emitted by different industries, including the shipping industry that I work heavily in, and they often get into the ocean and form strong acids because they're being rained out as acid rain into the ocean water. Because the shipping industry has set really strict targets on sulfur, so SOx specifically, but to some extent also on NOx, they have started to implement these exhaust gas cleaning system called scrubbers to wash out the SOx from the atmospheric output and instead wash it into the ocean as acid wash, which of course leads to the problem. And again, we're transferring one problem to the next. Area is they release it as acid wash, which is really acidic and can lead to ocean acidification close to the coastlines or in these shipping lanes or also in harbors. So we need to keep our eye on that as well. When we talk about ocean acidification, we also always need to talk about other ocean stressors. Like I already mentioned bleaching, but it could be sea level rise, all these impacts of climate change on the ocean, as well as pollution, like plastic pollution, or overfishing, because some of these stresses can really accumulate and then make it much more difficult for the species to adapt to new problems. And then we have to think about adaptation and what strategies are there, for example, nature-based solutions, but also just adaptation of the species and how can we really make it possible, as well as human adaptations to changes. So you can already see there's definitely different earth spheres involved, like land, atmosphere, and the ocean. But then there are also two different dimensions. I already mentioned some of the inputs or triggers of ocean acidification are local or regional. They come from the coastline and they cause local or regional problems like ocean acidification hotspots by the coast. But others, like climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, or specifically CO2 that triggers ocean acidification, is released globally and leads to global ocean acidification, so in the entire ocean. At the same time, there's also a dimension of time. And I would say, while we're trying to fix this global problem of climate change and ocean acidification, kind of as a result of that, we should already, in the meantime, try to deal with the local pollution, because that's something that really state by state and region by region can be taken care of and might be easier in terms of political will. So basically, where does this take us now? Well, the question is which actor and instrument should now take the lead on ocean acidification governance? As you've seen, there are so many different things to think of, different spheres, different dimensions. So who is in charge of ocean acidification? Well, that's a question that I have tried to deal with for almost a decade at this point, and really try to map out all the different actors and all the different instruments or policy instruments or legal instruments that could deal with ocean acidification. And I created a map. This is just a baby version of the map here, like just a fraction of what I have collected that shows you the actors here on the left. When I say actors, I kind of mean this can be everything from an international organization to an NGO. It can be kind of a public-private situation. So there's many different types of actors that I have been looking at, and they can address many different areas of ocean acidification. For example, on the left here, we have the IMO. IMO stands for International Maritime Organization, and that deals, for example, with shipping, right? So like what I've been showing you, NOx and SOx as well as CO2 are being produced from ships, and they're also leading to the local acidification through scrubbers, for example. So obviously that addresses one part of ocean acidification. But then there's, for example, also RFMOs, that's regional fisheries management organizations that can deal with more like the adaptation side and the impact side of ocean acidification. Then on the right side, we have instruments, and those being mostly kind of produced by the actors that you can see on the left. So again, the IMO, International Maritime Organization, has, for example, created the LCLP. which stands for London Convention, London Protocol, and really like deals with geoengineering. Another one is the MARPOL 7378. That is a convention that can or will in the future hopefully deal with greenhouse gases, so including CO2 from shipping. So again, that has been produced by the IMO, etc. But looking at all of these, none of them really is like made to deal with ocean acidification. The only actor that we have is the Ocean Acidification Alliance. And yes, we might be biased, but we are actually the only ones on the international plane that are purely created to deal with ocean acidification. When it comes to the instruments, one that really everyone likes to talk about is the climate change regime, so the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, because obviously that is dealing with the number one cause of ocean acidification, which is CO2 emissions. But we have to also keep in mind it is there to deal with greenhouse gases and not CO2 specifically, which is sometimes a bit problematic because, as you can see, ocean acidification doesn't neatly fit under this agreement because it doesn't really address it holistically, just this one part of the cause, and CO2 doesn't even have specific targets on its own. So you can see it is really complicated and not straightforward, unfortunately. So why are there so many? Well, this problem is actually called a regime complex. I know that's a very theoretical description of it, but it is a known problem in governance, and it is often happened to environmental problems. Well, my best guess for the reason why there are so many is there's different dimensions like time and space, but then there's also different environmental spheres like ocean, land, and atmosphere. And again, if we want to try to find the right place for ocean acidification in the international governance, then we really have to look at all these different angles, and that makes it kind of complicated. So that leaves us with ocean acidification as a complex problem. It means that addressing ocean acidification requires a multi-level approach. Because when we're really looking at the problem, as I said, it is global, but it is also local and regional. So as you can guess, there's no one-size-fits-all solution for every single coastline. So obviously California is different than Europe or Australia. So we really need to see how can we have, as well as a global solution, also locally oriented solutions. And ocean acidification governance needs to be adjustable and flexible. We by no means understand everything about ocean acidification, especially its impact yet, but we understand enough to take action, I would say. And so we need a governance solution that can adjust to growing science and technology and is therefore adjustable and flexible. So in terms of future solutions, unfortunately, I don't have a golden rule as to what we should be doing. Again, this is called a regime complex and is a known problem. So when you look at literature, for example, everyone has a bit of a different solution to what we should be doing. So a lot of people say, let's just create a new treaty for ocean acidification. As you can imagine, at this time and age, it's kind of difficult to just create a new treaty out of nowhere. It really takes time and it takes a lot of political will to create a new treaty. So we have seen this through the plastic journey, through the BBNJ journey. It's been really difficult. Another option is developing an existing one. That's actually quite a good solution. The more we work on different treaties and we work on amendments to treaties, or we work just on like even resolutions that relate to treaties, it actually makes sense to integrate ocean acidification there. Unfortunately, also there, I must say, I've been watching the creation of Annex 6 to MARPOL that is really trying to deal with greenhouse gas emissions from ships and the measures that need to be taken. And that process has already been going on for 10 years, and we're still facing the moment of adoption. So again, this can be difficult and dependent on political will, but it is still something I think we should really keep in mind and do what we can. When treaties are being revised, we really should think about ocean acidification and not give up on it, I would say. I also, because I'm an academic, I have to bring up there are other ways of doing governance that are not as traditional as the lawmaking that we have been doing up until now. I've spent my entire PhD dissertation trying to figure out which other ways there are, and one that I looked at is global experimental governance. That is a bottom-up and top-down solution at the same time, and is really trying to be more adjustable and flexible. And shameless self-plug, I wrote a book about this, so you can see on my last slide what it's called if you're interested. So now, who is actually impacted by ocean acidification? Well, technically all of us, but I want to use the case study of food security and ocean acidification just to give you an idea how daunting of a problem it actually is. But before we do that, so we're all on the same page, just to let you know what is food security on this slide. So food security is when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy lifestyle. Well, this has been a definition by the HLPE, the high-level panel of experts, and I know it's a mouthful, but it just is to give you an idea of what kind of food security could be, ideally. I can also tell you, because we have done research on this, ocean acidification will be impacting negatively all of these different aspects. So all people, all times, physical, economic, etc. So there will be problems. So now, I mean, I guess I gave this away, but why should we actually consider ocean acidification and food security together? Well, we already know that blue foods, including fish and shellfish and all different species, provide protein and essential micronutrients for billions of people. Yes, it is billions of people. Global consumption of aquatic food has increased more than fivefold over the past 6 years. So our demand for these type of proteins is only increasing. We really have to keep that in mind. And we also know that ocean acidification, together with ocean warming, here you can see how different stressors are accumulating, are already affecting food production. And we have high confidence that that is the case. So OA can reduce shellfish production, destroy coral reefs, which is their habitat. So that makes access for especially small fisheries really difficult, and alter not just quantity, but also the quality. When you look at, for example, oysters, I think there were some experiments that really showed that first of all, the species will be smaller because they lose size when they're adapting to a problem, but then also they're most likely going to have less protein and less fats. So that is definitely a problem when it comes to nutritional value. Or is increasingly not just an environmental problem, but it really becomes a problem for us and for human health as well. And we really need to have, and really urgently actually, an equity lens when we think about governance. And that is really tied with food security. Because there's a lot of gaps when it comes to data, but then there's also a lot of gaps when it comes to governance that we kind of already talked about. But all the data that we have on ocean acidification, or at least 70% of it, is produced in the global north. So specifically in North America and Europe. And that really limits the access to data and knowledge about their oceans to the people that rely most on these blue foods, so the foods that come from the ocean. At the same time, governance is not helping. As we have already seen, ocean acidification doesn't really fit anywhere. It most likely fits under the climate change regime, but it is not fully treated under that. It's mentioned and it becomes more important, or the oceans at large, but it's really not dealt with as a specific issue. Food security, on the other hand, is probably mostly dealt with under the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. So that's a different organization. And there's very little coordination between those organizations to really solve this issue. Every time, and I've looked into that, ocean acidification and food security are mentioned together. They're not really treated together. They're just mentioned in like a list together or in the same paragraph, even if it's in the same treaty, but they're not actually mentioned as one is impacting the other. So that has a lot of equity implications for those that are most vulnerable, like small and island developing countries, least developed countries, etc., because those are the ones that really depend most on these resources from the oceans, and they will face the greatest food insecurity. But at the same time, they're the ones that contribute least to climate change, of course. So how do we navigate this complexity? And again, I'm afraid I don't have a solution, but here are some things that we should consider. Well, ocean acidification is not an isolated environmental problem. It really interferes and interacts with all the different impacts on the ocean that we create as humans. Ocean acidification at the same time is not just an environmental issue, but it will impact human beings when it comes to food security, when it comes to public health, but it's also an equity challenge. Governance responses are fragmented and they're not coordinated, as we've seen. And even those institutions like the FAO that mention both, like food security and ocean acidification, don't treat them together. Future governance must therefore be flexible, interdisciplinary, inclusive, and it must be able to adapt to what we're learning. Also, addressing ON food security really requires a rethinking of governance, and we can't just carry on as we have. The question is, can global governance evolve fast enough? And I really hope so, and I think that's what we're all working on. That's it for me today. Thank you so much. Please let me know if you have questions. And those are the two. Here on the left is the book, and on the right is a paper that we have produced to look into ocean acidification and food security. I'm going to stop sharing. Maybe.
Yes, all good.
Yes, perfect.
Well, Thank you very much, Annika. That was a real tour de force, and I really appreciated how you took this discussion from from the science that Steve was mentioning to this transition into the institutional approaches. And I think you've reminded us, without really depressing us, that's quite the feat, that there is no single institution or single solution to ocean acidification. There is fragmentation in the institutions which manage on the global sphere this issue. There is that lone star on the sky, which is the OA Alliance. I noticed that as well. And I think the best conclusion I can draw is that ocean acidification is a challenge that requires navigating a very complex governance landscape, while also ensuring, as you said, that the science, the policy, and most importantly, the equity remain integrated and connected to this process. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
It is now my pleasure to introduce Inken Dressler, who is advisor and European program lead at the OA Alliance. Inken works extensively on incorporating ocean acidification into European legal, regulatory, and policy frameworks, thus engaging with the European Commission, regional seas conventions, and a wide range of stakeholders to help translate scientific knowledge into practical governance responses. Thank you very much. Inken, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cosmin. Let me just quickly share my screen as well. Okay. Okay, yeah, thank you, Cosmin, again for this wonderful introduction. As mentioned, my name is Inken Dressler, and I'm the European Program Lead of the Ocean Acidification Alliance. I would like to use the next couple of minutes to really take the OA governance overview that was given by both Steve and Annika as a starting point and continue with a more regional and national focus on ocean acidification action. For that, I would like to first introduce the Ocean Acidification Alliance a bit better and then dive into more targeted efforts that are undertaken by the OA Alliance. And then the second part of the presentation will really focus on the national and domestic scale, with a particular focus on ocean acidification action plans. And don't worry, I will explain what those are in more detail later on. Okay, so the OA Alliance, as Annika already mentioned, is the only government-led initiative in the world that is really outlining the needs for effective management and policy response to acidification. It was launched at the 2016 Our Ocean Conference by 4 subnational governments of namely California, Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. And it really had the mission of transforming the planning and response to climate ocean change and the vision of increasing ambition for climate action and ensuring the resilience of marine ecosystem and coastal communities. With that in mind, the aim of the Ocean Acidification Alliance is really to support the decision makers in, first of all, accounting and responding to ocean acidification, understanding climate ocean impacts, and also integrating ocean acidification into law and policy. And we really try to do that through work streams, including regional working groups, OA action plans, but also creative communications. I know it's been done by Annika and Steve, looking at a bit of international leadership from the OA Alliance perspective now in particular. I would like to highlight especially 4 initiatives or 4 work streams. First of all, through the UNFCCC, we really try to support the implementation of mitigation and adaptation agendas with a focus on ocean acidification, and we actively participate in the Ocean Climate Dialogue. Also, we are very involved with the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular Goal 14, Life Below Water, and even more specific 14.3, where we really try to help with the delivering of science, policy, and investments into the goal of minimizing and addressing ocean acidification. The third thing I wanted to mention is that we, as an implementing partner of the OARS program, the OA Alliance directly contributes to the global effort to identify OA data and evidence for ocean acidification mitigation and adaptation. And we also try to help integrate OA across key policies and legislation. And then finally, we really try to also show up at international conferences such as the Our Ocean Conference to really mobilize commitment for impact and change. Okay, now turning to the regional aspect. So first of all, the question, why is regional efforts even important, or why do they matter? Well, first of all, through regional efforts, we can really cater and foster shared governance and regulation and a regulatory landscape that can really help address ocean acidification in a focused manner. And that really helps us also to identify the relevant policy documents or the legal instruments that are most useful to actually use in ocean acidification action. Secondly, it is important for science prioritization and harmonization, because leading to this, the science can lead to an enhanced cooperation and the ability to prioritize research in similar areas. So overarching, we really need more coordination, and that can be best done on a regional level right now, as it allows for increased coordination on implementation and strategic shared approaches, also when it comes to funding. Currently, the OA Alliance has 4 regional programs that really try to facilitate and support the regional leadership on OA action that I just tried to highlight in my previous slide. These regional programs include the European program, the Western Indian Ocean program, the program for the United States of America, and we have our 4th program in Latin America and the Caribbean. Each region has already developed guidance documents on how to take action with regards to ocean acidification, which is really catered to their particular region. So it really makes sure that it takes into consideration the aspects most relevant to the region at hand. I here want to highlight that we are also planning on starting a regional program sometime soon in the Asia Pacific and Pacific Island region. But yeah, so far we have these existing 4 programs. Okay, now, as I mentioned, I want to give you a bit of a case study approach to the European program, as that is my legal expertise. So why did we actually envision and start this program? It was really this idea, and it came from the scientific background. So reading up on the scientific evidence on ocean acidification in European marine waters, we saw that all European marine waters are already experiencing negative climate ocean impacts, and these climate ocean impacts include ocean acidification. So we have ocean acidification in the Baltic, in the Northeast Atlantic, in the Mediterranean Sea, but also in the Black Sea. And another unique aspect of Europe is really that they have a shared policy and legal structure with the EU. And Europe and the EU have all have contributed a lot already to OA-related research through initiatives or organizations such as OSPA as a regional seas convention, but also the Global Ocean Acidification Network. And through this unique lens that we could see in Europe, we really wanted to explore and consider how the regulatory and legal frameworks in the EU and in Europe could be used and could be facilitating the incorporation of ocean acidification. And with all of that in mind, we really then established in 2023 both the European program, but also the OA stakeholder working group, which is really now a working group that works together with different stakeholders, including member states. We have regional seas conventions. We are in contact with the Commission. We have scientists also in the working group, and also NGOs. So we're really trying to have a global, not a global, but have every aspect and every stakeholder involved in the process. And what we do is we develop policy guidance. We try to share best practices between the different stakeholders. We try to lead discussions. We are in exchange with the EU Commission and with member states. So that's the EU program. And then when we started the EU program, it was really the first step for us was to map the regulatory and legal frameworks at hand. And through that mapping process, we really discovered these 6 directives that you can see on the slides here right now, which include the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive, the Water Framework Directive, Nitrates, Habitats and Birds Directive. And we then took all 6 of them and developed a 2-pager that really just highlighted how each of these 6 directives are relevant for OA action within Europe. From there, and because of the updating and review that is under process for the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, we then developed a guidance document, which you can see here on the slide, which is called Addressing Ocean and Coastal Acidification across the Marine Strategy Framework Directive in Europe. And we developed that together as a joint effort with the EU Stakeholder Working Group. So we really had active participation from scientists, highlighting how we could best integrate ocean acidification into the descriptors of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. And this is really our goal. So we're really trying to show member states of the EU how to integrate ocean acidification across the relevant descriptors in the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, with a lot of scientific backing also in the process. And that was published in 2024. And since then, we have, of course, continued our efforts to integrate or help the integration of ocean acidification into the EU. More recently, we have answered multiple calls for evidence by the EU Commission for new EU policy initiatives. We published guidance on how to integrate ocean acidification into the monitoring programs under the MSFD. So we're really trying to keep up to date with policy and legal developments within the EU. Then I would like to draw attention to another part of regional governance that needs to be taken into consideration when it comes to ocean acidification. And that is really through regional conventions and bodies. And with regards to Europe, we're really looking at the regional seas conventions, namely OSPA, Helsinki Convention, so HELCOM, the Barcelona Convention in the Mediterranean, and the Black Sea Convention. And we are actively, as the OA Alliance, engaging with all 4 of these European regional seas conventions in different capacities. So while all 4 regional seas conventions are members of the OA Alliance EU Stakeholder Working Group, OSPA is also an affiliate member of the OA Alliance itself, and the OA Alliance is also an observer to the HELCOM Convention. And we are currently in the process also of discussing with the other regional seas conventions if and how it would be good to become an observer to them as well, just to have this knowledge exchange in both directions as well. All right, so looking at the regional seas conventions, I wanted to highlight that each of them are already taking action when it comes to ocean acidification, and that is they're really showing leadership when it comes to ocean acidification action. So for example, when we have OSPA, they already have a working group on changing climate change and ocean acidification, namely called the working group COCO. They also published in 2023 their ocean acidification assessment, which is part of their quality status report that they publish, I think, within 6-year increments. And when it comes to the strategies that they try to follow for their member states, they have strategic objectives on ocean acidification. HELCOM in 2026, so this year, published their HELCOM strategic approach to ocean acidification. And it really draws between a link between the decrease in pH, organic matter respiration, and hypoxia. So really highlighting the role of coastal acidification and acidification hotspots that Annika mentioned before. HELCOM also intends or already does collaborate a lot with OSPA to further integrate regional cooperation and also the OA Alliance. And HELCOM is also in the process of drawing up an OA stock-taking assessment, which will also highlight OA in the Baltic region. Then the Black Sea Commission is really taking action to address land-based pollution, which is of particular importance when it comes to coastal acidification. And they focus on the conservation of biological diversity through, for example, marine protected areas, and they employ integrated coastal zone management. And then UNEP-MAP, similar to the Black Sea Convention, is focusing on addressing land-based pollution. They are looking into implementing, or they are already implementing, the ecosystem approach, and they are working on integrated monitoring and assessment programs within the Mediterranean Sea and the coastal areas. So yeah, with that overview of really like the more regional approaches that can be taken to ocean acidification action, I would like to now turn to more national ocean acidification governance. And similar to the regional efforts, first of all, we need to ask, like, why are national efforts important and why do they matter? So first of all, when it comes to CO2 targets and policy implementation, this is really something that happens on the national level. So it is each state determining their targets through, for example, the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. Also, when it comes to enforcement of any goals that they're trying to reach, the enforcement will happen on national level. We have local research projects that are going to be funded through through national funding streams. Also, regulating land-based stressors, so including nutrient pollution, is really something that you do through the national actions. And that is also something that Annika mentioned, that when it comes to land-based pollution and nutrient pollution, is really a stream that can be done through coastal states. And then what is also important is education and capacity building, and that is really something that can be done also on national level through, for example, school initiatives and something like that. One pathway that I wanted to highlight, which is also really close to heart for the OA Alliance, is the OA action plans. Okay, so what are OA action plans? First of all, the boring definition, not boring, but the definition is that it is a document that actually encompasses the actions that OA Alliance member states, or not member states, but states, members in general, will take or are taking to better understand the impacts of ocean acidification on their region and accelerate OA mitigation, adaptation, and resilience near shore. The OA action plans are really targeted towards national, subnational, tribal, and First Nation government members, but also affiliated members like regional science bodies, NGOs, or seafood growers, or also regional seas convention. You can see here on the right, we have now more than 20 ocean action plans that were published by states such as British Columbia, regional seas conventions such as OSPA, but also NGOs and many more. And something that is really important for us is to highlight that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. So if you go on our website, look at the OA action plans, you can really see that they're really targeted to the circumstances that each of these members has. And that is really important because, as Annika and also Steve mentioned, ocean acidification really happens differently in different areas, specifically also through these more coastal impacts or through NOx and SOx. So yeah, that is something really important to mention. The OA action plans are structured around 6 key themes, which include advancing scientific understanding, reducing atmospheric emissions of CO2, reducing land-based pollution, building adaptation and resilience, expanding public awareness, and building sustainable international support. And if you want to learn more about how these 6 key themes can be integrated into an OA action plan, or what they actually entail, you can look at our website where we have published an action plan toolkit that highlights and details all of this information. So just to summarize my very extensive overview of regional and national OA governance, I would say that OA action can and must be taken at different governance levels, including international, regional, and national. And the OA Alliance is really here to support the all ocean acidification actions on all levels. We need regional efforts because they matter for shared governance, for science prioritization, and coordination. And we need national efforts because national CO2 targets and the implementation strategies, as well as enforcement and legal-based stressors, are really focused on national level. So I would like to invite you all to have a look at our website, join the OA Alliance, and our efforts in addressing ocean acidification. We also have this QR code which leads to some of our resources. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very much, Inkan. I always appreciate during our webinars when we have this beautiful transition between the scientific, the academic, and the practical boots on the ground approaches that are going on around us. I think you've put it very well. It's one thing to recognize ocean acidification as a governance challenge, but quite another to see how the challenge is being addressed through concrete policy initiatives like what you showed us in Europe, regional conferences, and other national level approaches. And I think just to quickly conclude that your presentation was the perfect reminder that while fragmentation presents challenges, it also creates opportunities for collaboration and I think also shared learning. And with this quick transition, I will now introduce our final speaker who will help us bring all these threads together by looking ahead to the broader international picture and also the role of partnerships in driving meaningful progress. It is my pleasure to introduce Jessie Turner, Executive Director of the OA Alliance. With more than 15 years experience in public policy, stakeholder engagement, and coalition building, Jessie leads the Alliance's global effort to support governments and partners in developing these practical responses to ocean acidification and overall strengthening resilience through international cooperation. Thank you very much, Jessie. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Cosmin and the whole team. It's lovely to be with everyone this afternoon. And don't worry, I don't have slides. I just wanted to provide a couple little comments to everybody with sort of the lens of the OA Alliance and how we started. I think those sets of presentations from Steve and Annika and Inken were perfection. So I'm not going to add to that. I'm just going to maybe recap the highlights. And just let people know, the Alliance was started 10 years ago now by a handful of U.S. states on the West Coast, the states of California, Oregon, Washington, and even a province in Canada, a subnational government in Canada of British Columbia. And those states started the OA Alliance because they were seeing some of these first impacts of acidification on their oyster hatchery operations in real time. So in the early 2000s, there were big oyster growing companies and seafood companies out on the West Coast that were pumping in seawater from the coast into their hatchery growing operations, into their tanks. And for many years, they found that all of their baby oysters, tiny little, tip of a fingernail size baby oysters, were dying off. Almost 100% of them. And they didn't understand why that was happening. They thought maybe it was warming, temperature issues or a virus. And it wasn't until they started working with scientists that work on carbonate chemistry and acidification, many of the colleagues that Steve mentioned in that early presentation that are part of the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network, that they were able to identify it was because the pH was so low that they just didn't have enough calcium carbonate in the water for those tiny baby oysters to build their shells to become a bit more stronger and more tolerant to ocean acidification or to those types of changes. And so I mention that because we really were started as a response at a state level to this topic in a pretty practical way. And that is really the grounding force for how the Alliance thinks about this issue, that it is an international global issue around CO2 drivers. We need to talk about it that way. We need to frame this as a climate change issue and make sure that we are leveraging those international regimes to the most extent that we can. What are the responsibilities of the UNFCCC, as Annika mentioned? What are the responsibilities of the IMO, for example, and how do we really leverage those more? And then, of course, as Cosmin was saying, then how do we take that regional science and where there's gaps, really draw attention to those gaps and why those gaps are an equity issue, first and foremost in the context of climate change, and then how we really ground a local response, whether it's at a national level or even a very local level like a state level, and become really practical about it. So I think that's a little bit of the ethos of the Alliance. And as mentioned, we're the only, so far, entity really in the world tackling acidification from the policy side, just as Inken has described. So I'll just close by repeating some of the great points I think that were made in these presentations. The first is that I loved what Steve said. It's not just the amount of CO2 that is now entering the ocean in the world of an industrialized society, but really thinking about the pace and the quickness of that change. That's the issue. Really, I think these presentations gave a great example of the sources and the drivers of acidification, ocean acidification, but also coastal acidification, and that we are seeing an acceleration of that coastal acidification from nitrates, from wastewater, disturbance of coastal ecosystems, and those are all things that we can manage. Really appreciate your point, Cosmin. We're not starting from zero. I really want the rest of the world to know that we're not just getting started. There's 20 years of legacy here building the field of ocean acidification research and now moving into that policy space, as you've seen. And I really appreciate Annika's point that, we want to make sure that people understand that addressing acidification is not just an environmental issue. It really is about integrating ocean health, food security, equity lens, climate ambition. Those are the things that we're trying to draw people towards. And finally, in Inken's presentation, recognizing that to do this at a regional scale is really what we found a great deal of success in. Wonderful case study that Inken has been leading out of Europe, but also pointing out that I see we have some colleagues on the line from IOC Caribe that we've been working with in the Caribbean, and that we really are seeing some wonderful partners and traction start to come into this regional programs, and really saying it's not just the scientists in one region we need to draw a line around and start to coordinate. It's bringing in the ministers, it's bringing in the regional bodies, it's bringing in IOC, UNESCO, and really bringing in development banks in different countries and making sure that they understand their role in this work. And last but not least, I would just say some practical advice for this type of group. Steve mentioned that through GOAN, the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network, there is a early career group called ICONIC. I'll drop it in the chat, and that's really for researchers that are early career acidification researchers in the field. But I would definitely mention that through the Alliance and other entities, we're starting to see so many people that are coming into this field from a policy and law and management perspective. So I am not a scientist by background, and I really encourage folks that have different perspectives and different talents to bring to this work. Acidification is very cross-cutting. It's multidisciplinary. If you are interested in climate change and ocean issues and people and food, acidification is a great place for you to be working on. So that's one thing I'd love to leave you all with. And Cosmin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jessie. You brought the discussion from today you distilled the discussion from today very nicely. And I think your presentation reminded us that while ocean acidification is a global challenge, it has very regional effects. I particularly liked your example of the baby mussels. I hope they don't go away too soon, though. So, and I think overall you've left us with quite the powerful reminder that the pace at which ocean acidification is changing our ocean is particularly high, and maybe that should be reflected a bit more thoroughly in the pace with which we adopt new rules, new regulation, and new good practices on the global scene. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jesse. Thank you to all our other speakers. I think we are very well in time, and we can transition now to the Q&A session of this webinar. I have read some of the messages in chat. Thank you very much, Steve. You've answered quite a few already. I've been seeing some reoccurring interest on ocean acidification and how AI can help with this. Would you like just to synthesize what you wrote in the chat, maybe for our participants which are following on mobile phones and couldn't read? Would you like to add just a few words? In the meantime,
certainly. I mean, certainly there's a whole host of areas where AI is proving hugely beneficial to, particularly around synthesizing and bringing complex information together in a way in which we can then draw assumptions and sort of determine what's going on. However, I always come back to the point with AI that AI is only as good as the source information on which it draws, and we do know that AI will sometimes find answers even when the evidence there isn't for answers. So we need to make sure that we're very careful with how we use it. But we're certainly using AI in different aspects of marine research at the moment, and largely around the area of bringing what is effectively a very complex picture into greater clarity. So yeah, I'm really supportive of AI technologies, but as long as we know how they're treating the underlying knowledge, and then we know that the underlying knowledge and data is reliable.
Thank you very much. So yeah, well, what you put into AI, the level of quality is what you get out on the other side, basically. I would like to invite everyone who would like to ask a question live through their microphone and camera. Please raise your hand and I'll give you the necessary permissions, okay? And I'm seeing one come from Dr. Mohammed Rashad. Just give me 1 second and you can ask your question, okay? You can unmute.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for this webinar and for the organizations from Antonella, Cosmins, and for the presenters, and so informative. But I have one question. Dr. Stephen just he discussed in the chat that at the tropical regions, the increasing of the water temperatures of the oceans, it's just making the dissolving of the carbon dioxide, it's decreasing. So it's not like at the polar regions, okay? I'm working with one of my students at the effect of ocean acidifications and heat stressors on some of mollusk species at the Mediterranean Sea in Egypt. When we just going to record the pH level at the field, we find that the pH it was 7.8. And when I go to the reports that's by 2100, it will be the pH reaching to 7.8. And it's not like, as we're saying, that it must be from 8.3 to 8.1 at this time. So it's already we have the pH level at this time 7.8, and some of the reports say that by 2100 we will reach 7.8. This is the first one. And second one, it's not this is regions in the Egypt, it's not industrial regions. So we don't have most of the carbon dioxide emissions from the company or from the factories. No, we don't have at this regions any factories or some of the carbon dioxide emissions resources. So I'm just wondering about why at this area there is no any tourist or some of human activities. It's making some of these degradations or leading to decreasing this pH at this times in this year. So it is just so interesting point to talk about it. I'm just looking forward to hear from you.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me in the least that you've got pH that low. I mean, the issue is that many of those global projections were sort of based on global models that were very much linked to open ocean dynamics, and we know now that coastal systems don't operate in the same way. But equally, there's also a whole host of different parameters that interact with pH. I mean, the carbonate system effectively is a relatively complex system in the fact that we're talking about not just hydrogen ions, which drive pH, but also talking about bicarbonate ions, we're talking about carbonate ions, we're talking about alkalinity, total alkalinity. And alkalinity is not, as people might think, oh, that's the opposite of acidity. No, alkalinity is a measure of how much of a buffer capacity the water has to be able to handle carbon dioxide before the pH changes. And that changes massively throughout the world, particularly associated with the type of rocks over which water flows before it enters the sea, the type of minerals that go in there. So the idea that it's a simple product of you just put CO2 into the water, everything changes the same way, and it's all based on open ocean processes is completely wrong. So yes, it's not surprising at all that we are seeing huge pH changes in coastal areas. And the second point in terms of sort of local urbanization, I mean, we can forget about I don't come from an industrialized area, therefore ocean acidification is going to affect me. We know that the carbon dioxide that's causing those changes off Egypt could well have come from halfway around the world. You see if you look at atmospheric CO2 levels over Northwest Europe, they are exceptionally high. And you could be in a part of Europe where you don't see any factories or what have you, but you're under that CO2 blanket. So if we think that we can just cure the local CO2 emissions and therefore our ecosystems are going to be protected, we'll forget about that. We have to deal with CO2 emissions at a global scale, otherwise we're all going to be affected. So yes, CO2, so pH levels that low in coastal areas is not a surprise, and I think we're going to have to get, and that's why it's so important we have the contextual monitoring. So the idea that we can just monitor in one place and that we know the whole area, we have to observe what's going on our own doorstep to understand what's actually happening. And then also we have to tackle, not just by undertaking localized sort of management issues around the things we can control at a local scale, but also at the global scale. And we must not take our eye off the importance of global CO2 emission reductions.
So thank you for this explanation. And just want one advice. That's because we decided to make a recall for a future scenario for the pH or ocean acidifications. And when we just recorded the pH at the field, it's 7.8. We targeted to having 3 different treatment, or the control, it will be 7.8. And this is what we don't expect it to have it. So we just need to work at the 2 others pH level lower than 7.8. This is the first one, and we making the combinations between the thermal stressors and the ocean acidification too. So what do you think we can work on, which pH level under 7.8?
Please kindly note that we are entering the last 15 minutes. From this point onwards, I would really appreciate if we all just go directly to the question for the speakers, okay? Please, Stephen, go ahead.
Okay, well, what I'll do is there's a particular paper I think I'll put in the chat, which I think would be useful for you to look at in terms of how you adjust your approach to experimentation based on local conditions.
Perfect. Jesse, I see you raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add, and we'll also put in the chat, OA Africa, you might already be aware, Dr. Rashad, who is, OA Africa is one of the go-on hubs that is operating by a co-chair who is at the Fisheries Institute in Egypt, and she might be a great person to reach out to or get more involved in. Perhaps you are already plugged in. I'll just note on the policy side and the management side, just for everyone, the variability in pH changes is a huge challenge when it comes to getting policymakers involved. All the policymakers want to say, tell me the number, at what pH level do we need to be concerned? And they want sort of these thresholds. And I think, as you all understand, because I think a lot of you are scientists, and from the conversation that was just had, there is not only is pH not the only way to measure something like ocean or coastal acidification, it's different all over the world, and it changes daily, hourly, seasonally, in any place that you happen to be. And so it's really difficult just to say, go take one measurement, the pH is this number, and now we need to be less concerned, or we need to go into action. I think the challenge that we really work on with governments is to say, we see that, of course, your pH and your acidification measurement is going to be variable. We know the trends globally, CO2 goes up, pH goes down, and to really work with a global set of research partners, Steve included, to sort of think about what are the ranges that we want to start seeing in acidification indicator development. Between X or Y pH, we know that we're going to start having problems. Between X or Y, beneath a certain aragonite saturation state, we're going to start having problems. And I think that is really where the future of the science field is moving, is to be able to have policymakers give a little bit more clarification on indicators, whether they are chemical or biological. And once we get into more details around those types of thresholds for acidification, I think policymakers, insurance companies, seafood growers are going to be a lot more able to engage with the local science and with what an appropriate response might be.
Thank you, Jessie. Annika, I see that you've just answered a really interesting question in the chat a few moments ago. Does closing the gap mean a new dedicated protocol or better coordination and financing across the existing regime? This was a question from Shire One from their policy center. What I would like to add, and could you just very briefly give us a little bit of a parallel, because this year we've just passed, after 20 years of negotiation, the BBNJ treaty. Would such a treaty be recommendable? Do we have the 20 years to negotiate such a treaty? I think our listeners would really appreciate your view on this.
Yeah, as I kind of said in the chat already, I think it is really difficult and a little bit unrealistic to think about a whole new treaty on ocean acidification, not just because we would have to think of like who would, under which actor would this instrument actually be created. So like, as I said, it's not really straightforward who's actually dealing with ocean acidification. We can look towards the UNFCCC and kind of the climate change regime as a forum, or we could look towards the IMO or the Convention on Biological Diversity. It's not even clear where, in which forum this would happen, such a negotiation for a new treaty. And then in addition to that, it's just that, especially now, I can tell you from the negotiations on the MARPOL Annex 6 that is trying to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from ships, it's an extremely painful process at the moment because of the political situation that we're in. It is really difficult to agree on anything that has to do with climate change, and unfortunately, I don't believe it is realistic. So, and then, as you already mentioned, Cosmin, another problem is this takes a lot of time. Let alone negotiating just an annex to a treaty, or a change to an annex. Imagine a whole new treaty, and we've seen this, as you said, both with the BBNJ, also with plastic, and I don't think, and I mean, Steve is like more qualified to really reply to that, but I don't think we have the time to wait 20 years to actually come up with a solution. So I really think we should focus on coordination first. And for example, when I talked about food security earlier, I think, for example, we know that the FAO is looking at ocean acidification. It's mentioning climate ocean impacts, but it's just not making the connection between what ocean acidification does and how it impacts food security. And I think that's really the problem. And I think to some extent, unfortunately, it's a bit of an education or communication gap, I think, because we also, even working with Europe, and Inken has mentioned the directives, like sometimes the understanding of what ocean acidification is, where does it fit within the instruments that are already there, and integrating it is actually just often a gap of like understanding properly. And that's really what we're trying to work on. We really try to sit these people down, sit scientists down together with policymakers and say, here is what the scientists have to say. This is a translation of what the scientists have to say. And this is where it might fit into your policy. And that's actually, I think, the only way we can see progress at the moment, because we're just not in a position politically right now that we can really advance anything else than that, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Sobering, but I see a bit of silver lining in there. Thank you very much, Annika. Inkan, I have actually a question. You've given us already some projects which are quite mature in Europe, some policy approaches. How would you see, especially since we have today an international audience, how would you see these ones translated, implemented? You take what works, you discard what didn't work in Europe. How would you see these ones translated in other regions?
Thank you, Cosmin. Well, we're actually already starting to work on like translating what works well in one aspect in one program. For example, looking at the US. So the US has just published a guidance document on water quality and how water quality needs to be taken into consideration when we're looking at ocean acidification as well. And what we are starting now in the second part of 2026 within the European program is really taking what knowledge has already been collected within the US and seeing how we can incorporate it and how we can consider that within the European frameworks as well. So I think what we also need to do, and what we're starting to do now, is taking not just having engagement within regional hubs, but also then like having the regional hubs meet up and share and also enable a knowledge exchange between the regions, because of course there's going to be differences, but if we have aspects that actually do work in one field, it is beneficial, and it will really help us move along way quicker if we are then able to take the knowledge that has already been accumulated in one area that can be applied to, for example, now between Europe and the US, for example, to the European aspects and considerations as well. So that would be one example that we have, and that we are going to work on this second part of 2026 with regards to water quality.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Inkan, for that. I see, Stephen, that you've already answered this, but I think it's really interesting, the interaction between ocean acidification and the El Nino. Would you like to say a few words about this live?
Well, there's not a lot I can say about it. It's not something I'm particularly well versed on. It will be fascinating to see how this large climate event plays out in terms of ocean acidification. I mean, again, this is the importance of having observations, and particularly in certain parts of the world where we know El Nino is going to be, felt most strongly. So I think that's the key thing for me. It's the collection of evidence to be able to demonstrate those impacts. So yeah, it's an open and interesting question. I can't imagine it will bring us much in the way of good news, but here we go. Let's see.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Yes, it's the interaction between different events is quite a hard nut to crack, indeed. I think between all of our speakers, we have dealt with most questions in the chat, and this brings us to the next staple of our webinar. Basically, it's the infamous golden question that we ask at the end of our events. A very hard one to ask this time, because we've really hit a lot of issues. We've spoken a lot about a lot of the effects of ocean acidification, but I think I have one. I think I have a good golden question, which I will now invite you all to add to. Basically, if we were to meet 5 years from today, what are you most hopeful that you would see implemented, and what are you and which challenge you're most hopeful that it will have been addressed 5 years from now? Jessie, would you like to go first?
Of course. No, thank you so much, Cosmin. I think my answer is maybe in twofold. One is that more national governments have not just joined the alliance, but have really incorporated meaningful targets or approaches to acidification measurement and response across mainstream policy that they're working on all the time. This is nationally determined contributions or national adaptation plans, sustainable ocean plans, in the European context, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive or Marine Spatial Planning. Those are all things that we want to see more governments and look to those documents and see how they're accounting for acidification in their national policy. The second is that we want to see lots of investment from regional actors like development banks, explicitly, but not exclusively, more GCF projects, GEF projects that are accounting for funding ocean acidification research as part of a bigger climate or marine management project. And so we really need to see bigger numbers of investment in that capacity, not just the, individual philanthropic donations here and there. We really need to see those types of actors start to invest in this work.
Thank you very much. Stephen, would you like to go next? Let
Yeah,
me know
I
if I should
think-
repeat the question.
No, I think the thing I would like to see, I would like to see the ocean starting to be managed in recognition of the fact that it's connected to everything. It's often sidelined, as ocean issues are often sidelined. However, we've seen how behaviours on land and policies related to something you wouldn't even believe to be an ocean issue have huge effects on marine systems. So, when ministries of energy or ministries of transport or ministries of finance sit down and have their conversations, I would like them to be considering the ocean as part of those conversations, because the decisions they make around those tables have as much of an impact on the marine environment as the decisions and discussions that happen at the Ministry of Environment.
Thank you very much. Inken?
I think I will also, first of all, want to just, second everything that Jesse already said. But on the second part, I think what I'm also hoping for is more interdisciplinary work on ocean acidification. Me, myself, I have a background in law, but also currently pursuing a bachelor in science. And what I really see is that it really helps to just have these interdisciplinary connections for such an important and also an issue that has so many different drivers and outputs and everything. And what we've really noticed through our regional programs, it's a lot of, you need to have the right people in the room talking to each other. And so we need more interdisciplinary working groups coming together, discussing all the different aspects of ocean acidification. And secondly, from a more regional program, from a European perspective, I would say I'm just gonna hope that ocean acidification and climate change will actually be taken up in the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. As I mentioned, it's under review currently, and they're hopefully drawing up the final draft to be sent to the Parliament and Council later this year. And there are good indications that ocean acidification and climate change will be taken up in the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. And I think that would really be a good sign for ocean acidification policy and governance in Europe.
Thank you very much. I've noticed you mentioned the interdisciplinarity approach, and I'm absolutely sure that Antonella would like to add a bit on that. You're muted, Antonella.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. First of all, to the speakers, I have to say, I have a science background, but I have learned so much from your interventions. And as well, I thank also our participants who contributed to the progression of your presentations, your points raised, by asking some very perceptive questions. So altogether, we have had a very engaging event, but also with a high level and interesting and frank exchange, to be honest. So I was really pleased with the way everything went. If I may maybe add a small comment of my own. As I see the webinar evolving and reading the comments and following what people were saying, I would also like to add one maybe aspect to the very important points that our speakers raised. And that is a reference to, I believe, the importance of developing capacity, increasing knowledge, which should go hand in hand with the excellent work, the excellent research, the excellent support work that everyone is doing. So the importance of increasing knowledge in multidisciplinary fields, creating networks, encouraging decision-making and evidence-based leadership in order to tackle not just this problem, which we are talking about today, the issue of ocean acidification, which is today's topic, but to tackle the several problems, the polycrisis that we as inhabitants of this planet ocean are facing, and which in many cases we have created ourselves. So I strongly believe that this is the path to problem solving as well. To encourage, as many of you mentioned, a coordinated problem solving mentality and approach that is both global and timely, as Annika mentioned. And it would be my dream as IOI and as a scientist myself, that we start looking at our global challenges, as Stephen mentioned, including ocean acidification, as challenges that need to be addressed holistically. And I feel that the time is ripe for our governance structures, our research structures, our approaches, to start considering this planet as a single interlinked biome. The days when people focused on ocean and they focused on land and they focused on transport and they focused on this and that, I think we are facing the time when really we should start training ourselves and creating those support systems, those networks, those linkages, which will allow us to talk to each other across disciplines to meet a maybe more coordinated goal. So this would be the only comment I would add to your wonderful and excellent presentations and the very good interaction from the floor. So thank you on behalf of the IOI to our speakers, Cosmin, another excellent webinar, and also to our audience who I hope and trust you have profited from this event. So Cosmin, last words.
Last words, what can I say last words after so many insightful things have been said already? I too extend thanks to our tremendous speakers today, the extremely active participants. I think that this was one of the most active webinars we've had so far. And I too conclude along the same lines as Antonella. The ocean is indeed changing, but so is our understanding of how we can govern it and how this can be done sustainably. Thank you all. The journey of our CPDs will continue. The next one will be in September. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to write to us. And thank you again for being part of this journey. And have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much. If you want to follow the IOI capacity development offerings, feel free to follow our links, our socials, our Informa, and there'll be more news of opportunities there. And thanks again to our speakers, and really, we look forward to continuing this. Cosmin, this webinar is being recorded, right?
Yes, it's being recorded and will be I need to prepare it and we'll put it on YouTube. It's gonna be on the same page as where you registered for the webinar on the IOI homepage. So you're gonna easily find it in the same place, okay? If you also wish to watch previous webinars, they're all over there as well, if you've missed them or if this was your first webinar with us. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Steve.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Inken. Thanks, Jesse. And thank you to Annika who had to leave early. Thank you very much, all of you. Really appreciate it.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Take care and thanks.